Sandi Mann has generously donated her honorarium to. Can you tell us before we start? Can you tell us what you've donated your honorarium to?
Certainly. So it's a charity in Manchester called JAM, Jewish Action for Mental Health, and it's a mental health charity that was set up in order to help people who can't access mental health support for various reasons. And over the pandemic, we've been really active in providing mental health support. I'm involved, I'm a clinician, so I also help with them. And they've provided mental health support for people young and old across the pandemic, and really, really important right now. Mental health is a really, really big issue now. So thank you for that.
Okay, well, that's a really wonderful gesture.
So welcome to everyone who's present with us, whether you're viewing, you're in attendance at home or in a classroom, or here in person in the Vanier Auditorium. Thank you very much for being here. I'd like to just also, as I'm doing some thank yous, mention the persons who, without whom we couldn't have put on this event, and without whom it wouldn't be running as smoothly as it is, even with a few glitches here and there. We're very lucky to have the help of a number of individuals to get us to help us to deal with the technology here. But I'd also like to thank the Faculty of General Education, the VCTA, the VCSA, and the Communications Department at Vanier. Special thanks to Bruce Norton and his students for tech support. David Scott, Carlos Avila, Brandon Calder, Student Development and Services Office, Maria Grant. And there's a committee that worked together to put this event on. First, most notably, the committee coordinator, the symposium coordinator, Lily Petrovich, who's next to me here to my right. Many thanks to her for all of the work, the great work she did in putting together a really an excellent program on the topics and the topic of boredom. Before we proceed further, and most particularly to my introduction of this morning's speaker, Sandi Mann, just like to remind us all about the land relationship in which we are embedded here as we gather at Vanier College and meet in various venues at the college, whether in the auditorium or classrooms. We're embedded in a particular kind of relationship to land. And that relationship to land and territory is defined by the fact that the land on which we live, work, learn, play is land where indigenous people had resided prior to the advent of colonization for thousands of years. These lands, including Montreal, and were never ceded. That is, they were never relinquished or given over either to colonial powers or administrations or to the Canadian state. So we need to keep this in mind. We have to be aware of this as we proceed through our everyday affairs, our everyday activities. The land relations in Canada or Turtle Island gave rise to an injustice, and that injustice persists. And so we have to commit ourselves to acting meaningfully to correct that injustice. Sandi Mann, who's our speaker today, and we're really pleased that she's joining us to contribute her thoughts and the product of her research and her many years of work in psychology, contributing that to the discussions and the reflections that are making up this week's program. Sandi Mann is senior lecturer in the Department of Psychology at the University of Central Lancashire in the United Kingdom, and she's joining us from the UK. She also operates her own clinic, specializing in depression, anxiety, and trauma. She's the author of many articles, both academic journal articles and media articles, and many monographs, including a book entitled The Science of Boredom, Why Boredom Is Good, 2017. An interesting area of her work, the focus of Dr. Mann's research and writing has been the emotional experience in the workplace and in organizations. I think it's a facet that's particularly pertinent to our circumstance, since we are in a workplace and we are in an organization as we meet here. In addition to the experience of boredom in work and organizational settings, she has examined bullying, stress, anger. Today, Dr. Mann will speak to us about what is good about boredom, or in what way we may say that there's an upside to boredom. So I want to once again thank Dr. Mann for joining us and invite her to take over proceedings. Thank you, Sandi. Please, you can proceed.
Thank
when
you.
you're ready.
Thank you for that wonderful introduction. Good morning, everybody, or for me, good afternoon. I am speaking to you from a very grey Manchester day in the UK, windy, grey skies, a little bit of sun peeping through. So I can only listen with envy at Brian's description there of you guys in Montreal. We've got the cold as well. We have it all here. Nevertheless, it's lovely to be joining you, and you can be bringing your little bit of sunshine to me, hopefully. So I'm going to be talking to you today, as Brian said, about the upside of downtime, or why boredom is good, in brackets, sometimes. I'm going to be speaking to you with this screen. I've got another screen which I'm looking at as well. So when I'm looking away from you, I'm not looking out the window to monitor the weather, although that is tempting, but it's not improving much. So I'm just going to be looking at my screen instead. So that's why I'm looking away. Just to give a little advert break here, to expand on what Brian said, these are my books on boredom. Actually, it's really one book. It's a bit of a cheat to show you two books, but The Upside of Downtime is the earlier version, Why Boredom is Good, and The Science of Boredom is the same book, but it's a later edition of it. Feel free to buy both of them and give them to everybody for birthday presents. A bit late for Christmas, but hey, you can get in for next Christmas. But feel free to buy lots and lots of copies. Why not? Okay, so that's a little bit about me. And as Brian said, I also have a clinic. I'm actually very part-time in my university job now. So I'm not doing quite as much research on boredom as I used to do. But I do find that all the research on boredom is still relevant in my clinical field, especially with people with depression. So a lot of people, when I tell them that I'm known as Dr. Boredom, because I research boredom, as I say, it's not my sole job anymore, but it used to be. I spent about 15, 20 years just studying boredom, and people would say to me, gosh, that sounds really boring. And do you really like being called Dr. Boredom? But if you think what I do is boring, take a look at this. There is research out there that is far more boring than boredom. So I want to share this one with you. This is a piece of research that's more boring than looking at boredom. This is the world's longest running scientific study. And scientists have spent more than 85 years since 1927 watching pitch. This is a material called pitch, to try and spot rare drops of it falling in order to prove that pitch, although it appears like a solid, is in fact a liquid. So there are people sitting there like these guys here watching pitch there. It was a study set up by a physics professor at the University of Queensland in Australia. And do you know there's only been 8 drops of this pitch that they're watching out for in the past 75 years. The first drop fell in 1937. But it was another 10 years of observation before the next one fell in 1947. Would you like that job? That is even more boring than studying boredom. By the way, you can, if you really want to see it, you can, there's a webcam now. They've come into the modern era. And there is a webcam, so you can watch it yourself. You can sit there all day long. And when you get into trouble for not doing your studies, you can say, yes, but I'm taking part in a very important scientific study. The next drop, the last time it dropped was in the year 2000. So the next one is due anytime now in the next 100 years. So there's something to do if you feel that you need a little bit more boredom in your life. And I hope by the end of this session, you will agree with me that we all need a little bit more boredom in our lives. So what is boredom? Boredom has been called a plague of modern society. It's seen as something that's very negative. This quote probably sums up how most people feel about boredom. I found this quote on the internet. My Lord, I am bored. I wish something would happen. I wish an owl would fly into the office and poo on something. You might say poop, but I think you get the general idea. That would keep me entertained for at least an hour. And indeed, boredom has been associated with a range of negative outcomes. These are some of the outcomes: poor performance at work, more errors, boredom makes us sleepy, we're more likely to have accidents, more likely to miss work, we get angry, we get stressed, We engage in risky behavior to give us something exciting to do. We might use alcohol or drugs. Some people turn to vandalism. And there are even people who claim to have murdered due to boredom. If you want to know more about that, do read my book. See those little adverts for my book? Get in there all the time. Why not? Keeps the boredom at bay, doesn't it? But I want you to put all of this negative stuff to one side, because I'm going to show you today that like all emotions, if I can speak properly, boredom has its upside. And in fact, many of the problems associated with boredom are due, in fact, to the increasingly low tolerance for boredom that we have these days. Raising our tolerance for boredom will mean that we experience less of it and are less likely to do some of these negative things to help us to cope. Now, in order for us to therefore learn how to raise our boredom threshold in order to reduce our boredom, I'm going to introduce you to some people that you would expect to be very bored indeed, but they're not. So when I introduce you to these people, I want you to think about what their secret is. Why are they not bored? And you'll see what I mean in a moment. Have a think about it as we're going through. And if anybody wants to give some thoughts or ideas, I think you can do that in the chat. But feel free to tell me, to share why you think these people are not as bored as you may expect. Here's the first chap. This is a gentleman called Peter Willis. Now, he has the unfortunate label of being labelled the most boring man in Britain. Why? Because he goes around taking photographs of mailboxes, post boxes. He's taken photographs of 2,500 of them in the past decade. And he has a list of all the mailboxes in the UK. There are 115,000 of them. So he's got a long way to go yet. And he's programmed all the locations into his GPS device, which beeps at him every time he gets near one. He takes the photographs and adds it to his collection. I've spoken to him, interesting guy, not boring at all. I talk more about him in the book. There you go, another advert for the book. You will want to buy the book by the end of this session. So why is he so fascinated by something like post boxes? What is his secret? He is not bored. Now, perhaps you're sitting there at home thinking, that looks quite interesting, actually. I don't know what the post boxes are like in Montreal or Canada. I don't know if they're as exciting as the ones in the UK. But actually, most of them in the UK are quite boring. They're quite ordinary rectangular things. But there are some interesting ones. And he's very interested in some of the old ones and some of the old fashioned ones. But here's another man who collects things that it's really hard to see what's fascinating about it at all. Have a look at this one. Yes, this is a traffic cone collector. I presume you have these street furniture in your part of the world. This is David Morgan. I haven't met this chap, but he is the world's largest collector of those pointy road accessories. I am struggling to see what is so exciting about that, but that's not the point. The point is that he finds them fascinating and he finds them not boring at all. What is his secret? Have a look at this gentleman, Karen Beresford, who I have met on more than one occasion. Very exciting guy, this gentleman. And he is the president of the UK Roundabout Appreciation Society. It's a group he founded in 2003 to promote respect for the traffic circles that he calls an oasis of concrete. And he's published books and calendars, and he goes around taking photographs of roundabouts. And he has expanded his repertoire beyond the UK. So if you have any exciting and interesting roundabouts, do you call them that? I need a bit of help here. Is that what you call them in Canada? Those traffic circle things? If you have any interesting ones, then do let Kevin know. But there's more. This is Archie, and he photographs drain covers. Don't know really what else to say about that, other than he finds it very fascinating. And this is the last one. I'm saving the best till last. This is a gentleman, I can't remember his name now, but he takes photographs of park benches. Again, not really much I can say about that. But why am I showing you all these pictures of these interesting men? And they all are men, aren't there? There are some women out there who have so-called boring hobbies, but they do tend to be more men than women. So I'm showing you these examples, not just to prove to you that what I study isn't as boring as all of those, but to challenge you to change how you view the concept of boredom. I believe that we can learn something from these self-proclaimed dull men. There's actually a society set up in America called the Dull Men Society. It does accept women, by the way. I'm an honorary member, and I'm proud to be an honorary member on account of my research into boredom. And what they can teach us is how to increase our tolerance for boredom and therefore become less bored in life. The point about these so-called boring hobbies, and perhaps even being labeled as boring, is that these people focus on the mundane rather than the grandiose. Perhaps in our fast-paced world where nothing seems to sustain our attention for very long unless it's exciting, there's something charming, even beneficial, about taking time to appreciate the beauty and joy of simple everyday life. In fact, as a mental health practitioner, one piece of advice I often give to depressed clients is to look for the pleasure in simple, ordinary things like park benches, traffic cones, post boxes, roundabouts, drain covers, whatever it is. Perhaps if more of us stop to appreciate the small stuff, fewer of us would get depressed in the first place. Perhaps there is an upside to downtime after all. We'll return to this idea throughout, but I want you to hold on to that thought, on those thoughts. But first of all, what is boredom? What is boredom anyway? It's at this point that I would usually throw this open to the audience, but as I can literally only see, I think 2 or 3 people socially distanced, we're all so socially distanced that we're all in different continents. Well, I'm in a different continent anyway. So I'm going to have to answer this without throwing it to the audience, but do have a think about it. What is boredom? Most people think boredom is the result of having nothing to do. But actually, it's very hard to think of a situation where we literally have nothing to do. It tends to be really that boredom is having nothing to do that appeals to us at that time. As I say, it's very hard to think of a situation where you literally have nothing to do, with the probable exception of somebody like this picture who is in solitary confinement, perhaps in a prison. Generally, we have a range of activities that we can do. In fact, we have more activities that we can do now than we've ever had before, all at our fingertips, don't we? But boredom is when nothing appeals to us at that time. So boredom is partly independent of the task, the situation, or the individual. It's not about the task. It's not about you. It's not about what you've got around you. It's more like an emotional state. And it's been described as a state when the level of stimulation is perceived to be unsatisfactorily low. It's this low level of external stimulation that leads us to increase our neural arousal in search of variety. So when we're bored, we're looking for variety. We're looking for neural stimulation. If we find it, then all well and good. If we don't find it, we label that experience with the word boredom. In other words, for whatever reason, we're not stimulated enough, and that feels a negative thing, and we call that boredom. What do we do when we're bored then? You probably all have things that you do. Just going to move that one on. I like this picture. This is a picture of what somebody has done when they are bored in the office toilets. Not my office, not at my university. I got this off the internet. But can you see how they've plaited the toilet roll into these lovely creations while they were bored? When we're bored, it doesn't feel like a satisfactory state. It feels like a negative emotion. And in fact, boredom has a really bad press about being a negative feeling, which is the whole point of my lecture and my books. It's about trying to bring the positives to that negative feeling. So when we're bored, we're motivated to unbore ourselves. That is, we have a drive to unbore ourselves. That's the point of boredom. It drives us to do something to unbore ourselves. If we're not driven to increase the stimulation that we're receiving, we wouldn't label that as boredom, but we'd label it as something else entirely. Relaxation. You could sit on the beach and stare at the sky and the clouds and be perfectly happy. That's not boredom, that's relaxation if you're not searching for something else to do. So how can we unbore ourselves? We try to do this by adding stimulation. And there's really only two ways that we can unbore ourselves or add stimulation to our lives. We can either, as in when we're in a situation that doesn't have enough stimulation for us. Number one, we can either refocus our attention and resources on the boring task or activity at hand and try to make it more stimulating or more meaningful. Or if we're struggling with that, we can look for extra sources of stimulation that are not centered around the boring task at hand. So we can get other ways to get stimulation, things outside of our own mind or even within our own minds. I'll talk more about that when I explain to you the sorts of things that we do when we're bored. This is what my research has shown we do when we're bored. Now, normally, I'd ask you to give a show of hands if you do this when you're bored. So you can do it anyway. Can't see you, but imagine that I can. Raise your hands if you do this when you are bored. Drink something. Yeah? And if you drink something, I'm betting that it's probably, oh, Bruce has raised. Thank you, Bruce. Somebody is out there. Bruce, can I ask you, when you are bored, do you drink something like coffee? Are you there, Bruce? He's gone to get a coffee, I think.
I drink most.
He's gone off to get his coffee. I'm boring him. He's gone to get his coffee. Lots of people will drink coffee, often things with caffeine in, coffee or Coca-Cola, Coke, some kind of caffeinated drink because it gives us stimulation. But we might do anything. We might drink anything that gives us a bit of a dopamine hit, gives us pleasure. Water tends not to do it quite so much. We tend to drink water for hydration rather than for out of boredom. We want something with flavor or caffeine when we're bored. Okay, what about this? How many of you do this when you are bored? Chat. Now, this is something that we've lost through the pandemic in the last couple of years. We've gained lots of things through the pandemic. We can do this. We would have been harder to do this pre-pandemic. But we've lost perhaps that ability to chat around the water cooler at work. We don't have those opportunities anymore because even if we're in work, there might not be lots of other people there. Even now, I mean, in the UK, we are coming out of restrictions. We're all meant to be back in the office and all of that, but people are still adapting to that. So we don't see as many people. But in the old days, it would be very common for people to go and find someone to talk to if they're bored at work. We might think when we're bored. This is something that we do to try and get more stimulation from within. There's nothing happening outside. There's not enough stimulation. You're in a boring meeting or a boring lecture on boredom, and your mind might wander and you might just start thinking of stuff. Sometimes you can come up with really good ideas. Something I do on my commute, my daily commute. Not that I have that so much anymore, thanks to lockdown and all of that, but it was certainly a good time for me to do my really good thinking when I had nothing else to do. Now then, how many of you do this when you are bored? Eat something. Are these chocolate bars the sorts of things you can find in your part of the world? These are very common UK chocolate bars. And in the corner there, you will see a lovely, delicious, juicy looking carrot stick. Raise your hands if you're going to go for the carrot stick when you're bored. I bet nobody's put their hands up. We do not go for carrot sticks when we're bored, we go for chocolate, and there's a very good reason for that, and I've published research on this. We actually got people in a boring situation at my university, not listening to me give a lecture on boredom, honest, and we gave them a choice of snacks whilst they were bored. And not many of them chose the healthy snacks like carrot sticks or nuts. They all want the sugar and fatty things because they give you a dopamine hit, and dopamine is a great antidote to boredom. But it's not so good for us. That's the only problem. So it's not really a very healthy way to unbore ourselves. But what is a healthier way, but not as tasty, is daydreaming. Hands up if you daydream when you're bored. This is a brilliant way to, a much healthier way to manage your boredom. Bruce's hand is up again, thank you. We probably do all of these things, but I love a good bit of daydreaming, and I've done a lot of research, some of which I'll share with you today if we have time, connecting daydreaming with boredom and creativity. Daydreaming is the key to creativity. And this is why I go around the world virtually or in real life in the old days, advising people to bring more boredom into their lives, because when we're bored, we daydream. And when we daydream, we can be more creative. And I have come up with some of my most creative ideas on that commute to work, on that daydream. And, you know, I've done so little commuting over the past 2 years. I wonder whether I am less creative in the ideas that I come up with. And I do sometimes feel that I don't have enough time to think and process and daydream. And that's my excuse, Lily, for arriving at 8:30 in the morning UK time for this webinar, which was the middle of the night for you guys, and wondering where you all were, because I just don't have that time anymore, for that boredom time, that downtime, that time to think and daydream. And I miss it. And I think we're all, as a society, will be missing it. Just as productive, perhaps, but a little bit more down, a little bit more dull, I suppose, is just writing a shopping list when you're bored. And another favorite of mine, doodling, drawing on your notepad. Now, there's a reason I've shown you these particular things. It might be that you're sitting there at home or wherever in your classroom thinking, well, I don't do that, I do something else. The reason is that I did some research, and the ones I've shown you are the top most favorite activities for people to do when they are bored. And here it is. And this is what they do the most of. Now, I don't know if you can see the colors so well. So I'll try and translate, but the biggest slice of the pie is drinking, and the other one is thinking. The grey and the very pale blue. Drinking and thinking. Those are the things we tend to do the most when we're bored, which is great. The other big one is chatting, but that's great if you have someone to chat to, or you're allowed to chat at work or whenever. Eating is another big slice of the pie. We do a lot of that when we're bored. In fact, one of my papers was something like how Mars is propping up, so boredom is propping up the confectionery industry, something like that. I had another paper entitled Bored People Don't Eat Nuts, because they don't, they eat chocolate. And the other three are daydreaming, writing lists, and doodling. And as I said, boredom does have potentially worse outcomes than eating and an extra few calories. And if you read my book, there you go, another advert, you'll see the stuff about murder, vandalism, antisocial behavior, and all sorts of things. So I've just told you all the bad things about boredom. Let's go back to my original idea, which is the upside of downtime, why boredom is good. Let's go back to this whole concept of emotions, because boredom is an emotion, and all emotions have a purpose. That's why we have emotions. That's why we've developed this amazing emotional repertoire that we humans have. For example, anger is a valuable emotion for communicating to others when we are not happy about something. And it also can motivate us to do something about perceived injustices. Sadness also has a purpose, allows us to show others that we need looking after, perhaps, or help. Disappointment tells us that we've been let down. Jealousy can make us ambitious to strive to achieve what others have. Every emotion has its purpose. Boredom then has its purposes too. Boredom is a complex emotion. And as a complex emotion, it probably has a complex range of functions. Researchers, psychologists, like myself, philosophers, we've long pondered the purpose of boredom. So here is an exhaustive list of all the benefits that I have found of boredom. Number one, communication. Now, you might recognize these two folks. What are they communicating to us? I'm sure every one of you will be looking at that thinking, yeah, they are communicating boredom, probably. Disinterest, definitely something negative, aren't they? They seem to me to be very bored. Displaying boredom on our faces is sends a powerful message to your audience. This is something that's actually very difficult in a webinar situation, because I cannot see your faces. I do not know whether you're bored. You can't send me those signals. In the lecture theatre in the old days, 2 years ago, when I would deliver this lecture, I could scan your faces and look for signs of boredom. As a university lecturer, I know well how the expression of boredom can send the heart of the receiver plummeting. Not that I see it myself, Very often, of course, certainly not these days when I don't see anybody's faces. But as university lecturers, we dread to see boredom written on the faces of those with whom we converse, whether they be our colleagues, friends, clients, or indeed our students. Of all the emotions that we might not wish to see, boredom is probably top of the list, though anger is rarely welcome either. When we realise that we've bored our audience, we know that something has gone wrong with our message. Either we've delivered it wrongly, it's been misunderstood, it's inappropriate in some way, or it's just not hitting the mark. We know all this just from one miserable expression of boredom, and we can therefore adapt and change and turn those frowns upside down to happy faces. So this then is a valuable function to communicate a clear message that we're bored, and more specifically, that you are the one boring us. This allows us to plead with you to do something to change the situation so that I'm no longer bored. Indeed, many receivers of this message, if they're sensible, will quickly adapt their approach. Perhaps missing a few pages out, changing tack, asking questions, or even calling it a day. Success. The emotion has served its communicative purpose. Communicating our boredom then is important even if the target of our communication isn't the one who is responsible for our boredom. In other words, the communicative purpose is not just to get someone to stop boring us. Imagine you're at an opera, a classical concert, or a pop concert, whatever floats your boat, or whatever bores you rigid. Or you're in a meeting at work with new suppliers, or in a lecture at university on issues that you're not interested in, or a lecture on boredom by some boring person from the UK who won't stop talking about boredom. Conveying your boredom in these cases may be about communicating your beliefs, values, and interests, rather than just as a means to get the boredom to stop. Okay, keeping an eye on the time as well. Here's another function of boredom. Adaptive mechanism against societal noise or information overload. What does that mean? Well, let me explain with a little anecdote. Imagine that you would never get bored. Okay, wouldn't that be fantastic? Never ever get bored again. Imagine you wake up in the morning, your alarm goes off to wake you up, and you go, wow, that's amazing. That alarm woke me up. That's incredible. Let me try switching it off and on. Off and on. Wow, the sound that's coming out. Maybe you've got a radio or tone, whatever it is. It's on your phone. That's incredible. Spend half an hour playing around with that because it's so exciting. You're not bored of it. It's so exciting. Eventually you say, well, I really do need to get up, and you lift the duvet off and you go, oh, it's gone cold. Put it back. Warm, cold, warm. This is so exciting. Cold. Another half an hour. Eventually you open the blinds. Wow, it's sunny. What happens if I close them? Oh, it's not sunny. And so on and on. Breakfast, you're listening to the milk pouring on your cereal, that snap, crackle and pop. Do you have that in Canada? A lot of cultural references here. You go out, you start getting ready to go to college, university, school, whatever, work. And oh my gosh, it's been raining. There are puddles. This is fantastic. I love puddles. Jump in them, splash. This is brilliant. What happens is we become like toddlers, don't we? Toddlers, if anybody has a toddler or ever was once a toddler, you will know toddlers are excited by everything because they haven't got bored yet. Puddles of rain are so exciting because they've not bored of them. Everything is exciting. You try going for a walk just to the post box that our friend takes photographs of, I talked about earlier, or the local shop with a toddler, it takes forever. They're fascinated by everything. The rain, the leaves falling, the pattern of this, the gates, the wall, the pavement, sidewalk, whatever you call it. They're fascinated by everything. And that's what we would be like if we didn't get bored. We would be like toddlers, excited by everything, great, but we'd never get anything done. We'd be overloaded. We wouldn't be able to process stuff because we wouldn't be able to screen out all the boring stuff that's always been there forever. We get bored of stuff that we've seen before and that is no longer a threat to us or no longer a resource to us. That's important. It means that we don't get excited by our alarm clock every morning and by opening the blinds. We don't get excited by our toast for breakfast or our cereal. We've had it before. Nah, boring. We don't get excited by the puddles or the rain. You know, we only get excited by new and exciting stuff. In the UK, if it snows, we get very excited here. Might not be quite the same way you are, but we don't see snow very often. And it's a source of great excitement. But do you know what's not exciting for us? Rain. We do not get excited by that. And that's the difference. We need to screen out all those things that are no longer new. Otherwise, we wouldn't be able to cope. We'd never get anything done. So boredom protects us against information overload. It's a shield against self-confrontation. What do I mean by that? It can take, this is a deeper level really, but boredom can take a self-protective purpose. By claiming that we are bored, we can avoid confronting all kinds of less desirable parts of ourselves. For example, imagine that you are in a lecture on structural equation modeling. Perhaps some of you know what that is. I do. Everybody else around you, it's not very exciting, believe me. Well, some people may love it. Everybody else around you is nodding. Oh yes, this is fantastic, lovely stuff. But the truth is you just don't understand it because it's very hard. Rather than admit this to yourself or to others, it's far less damaging for your self-esteem to simply claim that you find the whole thing boring. It's not that you're stupid. Oh no, no, no. It's just that this topic bores you. Does that make sense? It makes perfect sense to me. We can also use boredom to demonstrate a lack of presence, that you don't want to be here. Oh, how teenagers are adept at using this function of boredom. Drag them on a family holiday or a day trip to see Auntie Agnes's new tea cozy, and there you see it. A teenager whose bored expression is clearly demonstrating a lack of presence. Perhaps there are teenagers out there now doing that, but I can't see them. They are there in body only, and don't they want you to know it? And here we have a picture of Barack Obama's teenage girls who were indicating very clearly that they did not want to be there. That was something that he was running. It was a Thanksgiving tradition when he was president. Great picture. Boredom has evolutionary value. In two regards, it's really important to our evolutionary past and to help us survive and develop. Firstly, in regards of habituating or getting used to repeated stimuli. I talked about that before, so that we get bored of stuff, so that we can adapt to new things. If we didn't habituate or get used to stuff, as I said before, we wouldn't be able to process everything and still function. This is put nicely by one researcher who says it's adaptive to grow bored with stimuli that, after many repeated exposures, had never been associated with any type of positive reinforcement. In other words, as long as something proves to be neither dangerous nor rewarding, we should lose interest in it and turn our attention to other things that may offer greater reward or need monitoring for danger. The second evolutionary benefit is thought to be in our reaction to boredom. Remember, when we're bored, we seek out novel and new stimuli, and it's this that's thought to be of environmental benefit. Would early man have invented fire or the wheel if he did not have time on his hands to develop new ideas? Similarly today, it's often boredom that causes us to seek out new things, develop new ideas, and come up with new inventions. This was really, really apparent during the pandemic. And I gave lots and lots of talks to the media at the beginning of the pandemic, in those first few months, back in March to July 2020. Because what we saw was people suddenly with time on their hands, sitting at home, unable to go to work. And they became very, very creative at creating new systems and adapting to the new situation. Even what we're doing here, and Brian spoke at the beginning about some of the technical issues, but it's brilliant. Everything is fantastic. The fact that we're doing this, the fact that we've created a new way of working, a new system, is absolutely incredible. We needed the time on our hands to be able to do that. We needed the boredom of not having so much to do that, just that downtime to come up with these ideas and these creativities. Boredom, as another function, even encourages pro-social behavior. Who knew? According to a study entitled Bored George Helps Others, boredom can inspire people to seek out ways of being altruistic, empathetic, and to engage in pro-social behavior, such as giving charity or even donating blood. This is because when we're bored, boredom can often feel like a lack of meaningfulness. And so we yearn for meaningful activities, and pro-social behaviors can give us this meaningfulness that we seek. And my very favorite one, the one that I'm most interested in research-wise, is that boredom stimulates creativity. Big letters, because it's really important. Boredom is a paradoxical phenomenon then, in that it can both stifle and stimulate creativity. In my own research, I found that some people claim that being bored makes them so tired and lethargic that they can't be bothered to do anything. But, and indeed, a quarter of my participants said that being bored made them want to go to sleep. But a significant minority, around 20% of my participants, also claimed that being bored actually made them more creative. And 16% claimed that being bored out of their minds helps them come up with new ideas at work. How can this be? How can boredom both stifle and stimulate creativity? It may depend on the type of boredom that you experience, which is beyond the scope of this talk, but it also may depend on whether you daydream when you're bored. And as I said before, that's the real key, daydreaming. Time to be bored, creative. Here's an example of having the time to be bored and creative achievement. And as I said before, there's probably no more boring environment than the confines of prison. And there's a number of classic works that were achieved through this enforced downtime. For example, Martin Luther King wrote a letter from a Birmingham jail whilst he was imprisoned for organizing a non-violent protest against racial segregation in Alabama. And there's very many other people, including Nelson Mandela, Oscar Wilde, who also penned famous works whilst they were bored out of their heads in prison. And what's the key? We can see it there with Martin Luther King, staring out, daydreaming. And that's the key, as I said before, and I really want to emphasize this point. The idea that daydreaming is the key to creativity is not just my idea. Other researchers have come up with it before me, unfortunately. No, I'm only kidding. The idea that boredom can lead to a search for variety was first posited by a researcher called Bell in 2011. When individuals are bored, they find it difficult to focus their attention on the task, and thought processes shift to other areas that can provide more stimulation. We've talked about that. So when you can't physically escape the task to undertake a more engaging one, this attention shift is often from an external focus on the task to more internal focus on inner thoughts, feelings, and experiences. This inner focus allows a way of gaining the stimulation that's being craved and that's missing from the boring task. The internal focus could involve a search for new ways to carry out a boring task to make it more engaging, or it could involve thinking about unrelated problems or ideas whose consideration is more appealing than the boredom task in hand. It's this attention shifting that's termed daydreaming and is thus a common byproduct of boredom. And this is what I've done most of my research in. Daydreaming then has been described as a shifting attention from the external situation or problem to the internal representation of situations, memories, pictures, unresolved things, situations, goals, things like that. Shank in 1982 proposed that daydreaming is part of dynamic memory, and that's the ability to reevaluate information and solutions with the re-examining of a problem or unresolved scenario. So the act of daydreaming can provide individuals with the opportunity to re-examine a problem or situation as many times as they wish, in varied ways, and each time incorporating new information and different possible solutions. The benefit of daydreaming then is that seemingly illogical ideas can be explored in ways that may not be even feasible, but through this exploration, new or more suitable solutions to problems or unresolved conflict can be found. This leads then to creative problem solving, which suggests the link between creativity and daydreaming. And that theme was taken up in a Newsweek article in 2019, where they described daydreaming as a mental state for creativity, insight, and problem solving, in which truly novel solutions and ideas emerge. I did some research to test this out. This is what I did. I gave people a really boring task. This is the boring task I gave them. I got them to copy out phone numbers from a telephone directory. Really boring, soul-destroying, meaningless task. I then gave them a creativity task where they had to come up with solutions to problems. This is the task I gave them, remote associations task. And what you have to do is you have to think of the word that connects all three of those words in each sequence. So a word that connects law, birthday, and swim. Anybody like to guess that word, putting you on the spot now? I can only see Brian picking on you again. I'm going to leave that one with you. Do you know what? I would normally have people shout out. There is a, no, I'm just looking at the chat. All right, I'll tell you the answer to that one in case you haven't got it. The answer to that one is suit, lawsuit, birthday suit, and swimsuit. So those are creative solutions. And what we found was that people, what we find is that my slides are no longer moving forward. Oh, there we go. That's what we find. What we found that participants came up with more answers to the creativity task. They were better at it, following the boring task of copying the phone numbers out than they were without the boring task. We also gave them a lot of other different creative potential tasks as well. And we found that boredom leads to creativity. The more bored they were, the more creative they were. And we also found that boring tasks involving reading rather than writing sometimes can lead to even greater creativity than the writing tasks. So asking people to read those phone numbers out instead of writing them led to more creativity. And this is thought to be because you've got more daydreaming potential when you're reading than when you're writing. So daydreaming is the key. So we need to harness that power of boredom, don't we? How can we actually do that? I like this cartoon here because it says back in 2003 we had something called boredom. We could say the same thing now. Back in 2022 we had something called boredom. We shouldn't know what boredom is anymore. This is the thing. It should be a relic of the past. We should be saying, gosh, in the olden days people used to have this thing called boredom. We don't know what that is anymore because we've got the world at our fingertips. But we don't. We still have boredom. And that's really why boredom and studying it is still so important. There's two kinds of boredom that we can try to unbore ourselves with. One is the existential boredom, when life itself is boring. And the other is task-specific boredom, when we're doing something, what we're doing right now is boring. And we need to harness the powers of both in order to reduce our boredom and cope with it better. So task-specific boredom is a little bit easier to do something with or to try and manage. But if you're bored in a particular task, you can do what this gentleman is doing and make paper aeroplanes. But there are other things you can do. You can change the way you view dead time, look for meaningfulness, change the scenery, reward yourself for doing the boring stuff, eliminate distractions, add stimulation. All of these things will help you manage boredom better. We can treat boredom, such as waiting in a line, as luxury time. We lead such busy lives that the joy of being able to take a breath sometimes should be pounced on in delight. So instead of getting our phones out and swiping and scrolling our boredom away, we should use that time as downtime to allow ourselves to think, process, and daydream. We can refocus our attention on the task in hand by trying to make it more meaningful, breaking the task down into smaller parts, change the scenery, going for a walk, comfort break. Those can all help us refocus again, reward ourselves, but hopefully by not eating chocolate. Eliminate distractions. When we're bored, remember, we're constantly seeking stimulation. So even the slightest distraction can seem appealing when competing with a boring task. So even that pile of ironing in the corner, which we see more and more when we're working from home, can seem like a desirable alternative when you're faced with a pile of reports to write at home. So eliminate those distractions and do some things more, or you could do something more stimulating at the same time. This is why I think adult colouring has become so popular. You know, those colouring books that you can get, the very popular ones. I think it allows people to do something to fill in that little bit of boredom whilst allowing them to still attend that boring meeting or whatever. I'd just like to reassure everyone that I'm not colouring in at the same time as doing this because I'm not bored. Existential boredom then. This is the more bored of life, which is a little bit more worrying because that is more leading into depression, which is one of my specialist areas. And as I said at the beginning, this explains the link with boredom and mental health as well. But if you are bored of life, be more like those boring people that I showed you at the beginning, the postbox man and the drain collector and the roundabout man. Look around you, treat the world as if it's a new place. Look with fresh eyes at the world. Look at the clouds. You may see a shape like a cat in the clouds. Just be more like those dull men that I showed you at the beginning. Become curious. Find interest in what you do. Copy what children do. Children are never bored. They're always looking for things. They're curious about everything. How does this work? What happens if I do this? Can this be taken apart? What's this made from? Curiosity stops boredom from kicking in. Engage with people, talk to people, find out about their lives and what they do. Other people may live extremely interesting lives if only we bother to find out about them. Learning something new, take up a new hobby. It's hard to be bored when you're busy. Knitting is very popular now, very, very popular hobby, but find something that grabs you, something that interests you. Go back to nature. Nature, according to Dr. Belton from the UK, is the antidote to boredom, because natural environments provide stimulation that don't require focused attention. And this is a contrast to most of the stimulation in our day-to-day lives that requires sustained effort. So get out into nature, go for a walk. Turn the TV off. And I'm going to link that to digital detox. Getting rid of the internet, I say streaming through the internet and relying on the internet. But how many of you have time when you don't go on the internet? How many of you have downtime, digital detox? I'm a big believer in digital detox being the antidote to boredom. And in fact, digital detox is a growing trend. One of the problems that we have nowadays is that we're swiping and trying to swipe and scroll our boredom away, but it's not working. We are more bored than ever before. So there's something about swiping and scrolling and going on the internet that is not helping us, but we think it does. And we're constantly looking for more stimulation. The more we have, the more we get. And with the internet, each page is new. So we get addicted to newness and novelty. So we need to lower our need for that novelty and that stimulation by doing things that are less exciting, less what I call whizzy, whizzy, bang, bang, calmer, more like searching for post boxes and traffic cones, less stimulation. And by doing that, we'll find that our tolerance for boredom increases. If I was doing this in person, I might hand you all a wristband which says switch off to switch on, or this is my digital detox day, the upside of downtime, which is all about promoting the idea that if we could just switch off a little bit from the internet and look around us, appreciate nature, look at the post boxes, mailboxes and traffic cones and garden benches, then we might find that we do not get as bored as much. So I think I'm coming up to my time up. So I'm going to stop there and throw the floor open to you to share any questions that you have. I was going to say questions and answers, but I guess I'm the one that's meant to provide the answers. Is that okay, Bruce? Sorry, Brian, Lily, have I met the time requirements appropriately?
Sorry, Brian, grab this mic.
Okay, hi Sandy. Sorry, I was talking into a mic that wasn't working.
You were on mute, weren't you?
I couldn't come up with a creative solution to
that.
Anyway, that was in some ways, yeah, unboring turn of events. But anyway, at least it's work. Yes, it would be a good time to move to questions and answers. And I want to thank you so much for a really stimulating, interesting, fascinating account of boredom and the ways in which to deal with it. So anyone who might have a question in the audience, let me know, and I'll hand you this microphone. If you're elsewhere and viewing and attending through Zoom, send a question through the Q&A, or you may send, through the Q&A icon there. Just click on the icon and send it in. So let's get, as people are preparing to draft their questions, let me perhaps start things off here by noting something that struck me as you were speaking, and this has actually struck me numerous times listening to other speakers about boredom, is that there are a number of different kind of paradoxes about boredom, ways in which it's rather elusive. I think you also alluded to that. In some ways, I felt at times I've understood what it is and have a kind of a grasp of what the boredom state is. And then there are other times when I'm really not so sure. And it's mixed up with a number of other kinds of emotions, states of being that may or may not qualify as boredom, and may in fact be states other than boredom. But another paradox, though, that has come up and that struck me as you were speaking is the one that has to do with what you were mentioning at the end, and that is that we're in the present time, in the present context, we seem to be in the paradoxical situation of being supposedly overly stimulated, but at the same time, seemingly more, I guess one might say, prone to boredom. I mean, as I've been reflecting on boredom, I've thought just at times about the presence of boredom in my parents' lives, in my parents' generations, and my parents' generation. And my inclination has been to say that I don't, and maybe I've misread them throughout my life, but I kept thinking that I don't recall them ever being bored, and yet they were living in a situation in which they didn't have access to a constant, persistent source of stimulation. Again, it may be just a misreading of my parents, and maybe we tend to do that. But there is that kind of, it seems that we have the impression, and in fact it might be empirically demonstrable, that we are more bored, and yet there seems to be more to stimulate us. So, well, I don't know, that didn't really turn into a question.
Not a question.
It turned into a comment, but perhaps you can pick up on it.
Yeah, I mean, this is my main thesis, actually, Brian. So you're absolutely right. This is where I started from. Why is it that we have everything at our fingertips? We've got the world at our fingertips. You know, we can use this to access the entire world. We can go around museums on this. We can go virtual tourism. We can do literally anything we want. We shouldn't know what boredom is, and this is kind of my whole point. We should be, all our audience should be saying, "Gosh, what is boredom?" We should be saying, "Our parents talk about this thing called boredom. We don't know what it is anymore." And we're not. Not only that, but we seem to be more bored than ever before. Now, I say we seem to be because boredom is a very new, relatively new topic of research. So we don't have a lot to compare it to. We don't know whether we are more bored than ever before. It was a term that wasn't really used before the 1800s, actually. So we don't know if we're more bored than we ever are before. But what we do know is that we shouldn't be bored now. We shouldn't know what boredom is. And the reason that we are more bored than ever before, and research suggests that boredom is a real problem, both in school and at work. Why are we so bored? And the reason that I postulate that we're so bored is that we are living in a society with ever increasing amounts of stimulation. So that's the paradox. That's another of your paradoxes, that the more stimulation we have, that we should become less bored, but the more stimulation we have, the more bored we seem to be. And I'll give you a really good example of this. If you get a bunch of children, and I've done this as research, I did some research for Emirates Airline, and I gave a bunch of children loads and loads of toys. We wanted to see what would occupy them the most on an airplane. So we gave them a bunch of toys. And what we found was that if you give them too many things, too much stimulation, they don't really engage with any of it. They don't know what to do. They get a bit overwhelmed with the stimulation, and they flit from one to another. And then after a very short time, they go, "This is boring, I'm bored." But if you just give them one thing, and even something very low tech, I gave them a notepad and colors, crayons and stuff, they would spend longer playing with that if you only gave them that one thing than if you gave them lots of things. What do we learn from that? Too much stimulation doesn't unbore us, it bores us. It bores us more. And the reason being that whenever we get stimulation, as in something new, novel, something noisy, something loud, something different. Whenever we get stimulation, we get a hit of dopamine in our brains. We have a center in our brains that is receptive to novelty. We get that hit of dopamine. Dopamine, as you will all know, or you may all know, is a feel-good chemical. It makes us feel good, which is great, but it's very addictive. So like a drug, it's very addictive. And once we've had some dopamine, we want more. So we want more stimulation. If you get stimulation, you want more of it, and you want more of it. A bit like me with chocolate. You want more and more and more of it. I'm never ever going to say, you know what, I'm done with chocolate now. Never works like that. And it's the same with stimulation. The more we have, the more we need. And that's why if you give children one toy, there's less stimulation, they won't need more. And we've created a society where everything is very fast-paced, lots of novelty, constantly moving images, all very, very exciting. And all that does is give us hit after hit after hit of dopamine, which means that we want more and more dopamine. And of course, once we've seen something on the internet or whatever, it's no longer novel, it's no longer new. We need something else new and novel. We're bored of that. So we've created a society where we just seek novelty all the time and that dopamine. And the antidote to that is those dull men I showed you at the beginning. And I use the term dull men, that's a term from the Dull Men's Club, that they find the joy in the mundane. They don't need new exciting things. It's much more gentle pace of life, like our ancestors, our parents generation used to enjoy. So yes, we've created this world of busyness, but we can go back to how things used to be. And we might think that's more boring, but actually, once we get used to it, we will be less bored. Does that make sense?
Yes, absolutely. I think it's precisely my view has been that it is necessary to take account of the cultural context, but also the economic context in which we live and its relationship to boredom. I think on account of the current, I think the current economic context and the way in which the production and distribution and sale of technologies, of information technologies, have this kind of a particular kind of effect on boredom, in as much as I think we want to be sold. We're almost made, companies that produce technologies and various kinds of applications for technology want in a sense to bore us more, or they want us to get bored in order to sell us things to make us unbored. I don't know. In a way, I wonder if the current state, the current economic circumstance, and the current state of capitalism is doing something like that. And we're compelled to be bored or set up to feel something like boredom in order to address it, and therefore buy more products, buy more applications, buy more games, and so on and so forth.
Definitely. The entertainment industry needs us to be bored. They don't want people like these postbox collecting people, or they don't want us to go around taking photographs of garden benches for entertainment. That doesn't sell much. We can't buy their products. They want us to be bored. So they want the constant stimulation. They want us to get addicted to dopamine. And we have to resist that, I guess, and go back to a more simple way of life. But also in relation to what you're saying there, in terms of economy and social justice and things like that, and kind of leading into how you started how you opened the morning as well, in terms of, I think, the alluding to social justice. We should think about people's means and people who don't have the wherewithal to unbore themselves in a productive way. So one of the solutions, for example, to unbore yourself in a more productive way is to get your heads out of the screen, like I said, and to do something that involves more of your senses. For example, in the old days, whatever that meant, we did crafts and we did things that involved a more four-dimensional approach to unboring ourselves. Now our entertainment is much more passive. Television, the internet, which is fairly accessible to most people, but what's definitely not accessible to most people are more creative ways to unbore yourself. So it'd be really easy for me to say, you know what you should all be doing instead of going on your devices? You should be going and playing tennis in the park. And I don't know what it's like in Montreal in Canada, But in the UK, it's really only the rich kids that get to play tennis, because there's not very many public parks that have tennis courts anymore. So they tend to be part of private clubs. And that's the same with a lot of things that you suggest people should do. Just go and do this, go and do that. A lot of these things require money and resources, and a lot of people don't have them. So they are forced to become addicted to these relatively cheaper ways of entertainment, these electronic means, but that's not healthy in terms of boredom in the long term.
Thank you. Okay, so let's see where we are time-wise. We have a few more, yeah, we've got a few more minutes. There are no questions at the moment in the Q&A, so oh, there is one, there's Lily, okay. Very good.
I'm just standing here in the middle of the auditorium, Brian. I can see why you didn't notice me there. That's all right. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Mann, for that. That was so interesting, and it adds so much to the symposium, what we've been doing. It ties in very much with what we heard yesterday from Dr. Alpodoro, who talked about socioeconomic status and boredom. That was actually, I know he's there. Hopefully he'll come up with a question for you, because he's part of this as well today. So my question had to do with happiness and the relationship between boredom and happiness. It's something that occurred to me yesterday during the talks that we listened to. It's interesting when you look at happiness theory that in first world countries, even though people have so much more, they don't seem to be happier than people. If you gauge them, it's a subjective measurement. You can only decide for yourself how happy you are. And it seems that people in first world countries who have much more materially, their happiness level isn't much higher, let's say, than somebody who seems to be suffering more in third world conditions. The study seems to show that that's not predominantly what makes a person happy. So I was wondering if you looked at how boredom is connected to happiness. And I think that you have answered to a certain degree about material. Well, there's a flip side, the material, the stimulation that we have access to, and that inability to actually solve our boredom problems. And on the other side, having the access to stimulate yourselves in new and interesting ways, like tennis, which requires some money. So the two things, happiness and boredom, I was wondering if you can speak about that and how we can understand that.
Very good point. Very good question there. I think Lily, that the link between happiness and boredom is in meaningfulness, and I did allude to that a little bit, but only gently in my talk previously. I think that one of the reasons that one of the things that makes us happy is meaning, having meaningfulness, a meaningful life. And I see this very much in my clinical arena. I spend most of my time now in clinic, and I see that the people who are bored of life, if you like, or depressed, or not happy, whatever you want to call it, they lack meaning, and they're all sort of like, what was the point of everything? And you know, and their lives are, it's not so much that they're lacking stimulation, because most of them still have access to the world. The point is that they just don't see the point of it. What's the point? You know, it's boring. There's no point to it. And one of the things that I always advise people to do to bring meaning back in their lives is to seek meaningful experiences. Volunteering, for example, is a really, really good way to get meaningful experiences in your life. Because if you're giving to other people, if you're doing things for other people, that's a purpose, that's a meaning. And that will give you that happiness that we seek. And one of the reasons that I think in the first world we seem so unhappy is because, or so many people seem so unhappy, is because of the fact, although we have so much to stimulate us, we want more. We're always wanting more, whether that be more dopamine or whether that be more things that our friends have got. And social media is has a huge responsibility for this, comparing ourselves to other people. We're not as good as other people. We don't lead as meaningful lives as other people. And all of this social comparison, I think, leads us to this state of dissatisfaction, this lack of meaning. So I think the meaningfulness is the link there, is the linchpin really between boredom and happiness, if that makes sense.
Yes, thank you. Do we have any questions? Okay, so we have a few more minutes. We'll have to conclude in about 4 minutes, in fact. Oh, we have till 10. Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, we do. No, we have till 10. 10:15. Yes, I'm sorry. Okay, so I have another question here. This event is scheduled at the same time as a course that I happen to be giving, and it's a course about risk, and it's in fact an inquiry into really more like the knowledge dimensions of risk. But I asked students before today's event what they thought the connection or the relationship was between risk and boredom. And the responses that came up were the ones that you referred to initially, which were the negative set of responses. And that is, if you're bored, it can result in risky kinds of behavior, risky outcomes, risky behavior whereby harm can be done to yourself or harm can be done to others. You've studied a lot, you've looked a lot at workplace boredom. And I'm wondering if you might address some of what goes on insofar as boredom is concerned in the workplace, which I guess might be the kind of circumstance where boredom can have, among others, but among the circumstances whereby boredom can have those unwanted, harmful consequences. And what could we do to assist people in adopting various of the techniques that you were mentioning in the latter half of your talk about how to deal with boredom or get oneself out of a boredom state or turn the boredom state into something productive and meaningful and so on. So yeah, I'd like to just maybe have a few thoughts about boredom in the workplace and its relationship to risks, risky outcomes, unwanted outcomes, danger, and so on, and what to do about that.
Yeah, it's really, and again, another good question, because we do see risk as a negative thing. And the downside of boredom is that it leads us to bore ourselves. And some ways that we unbore ourselves might be to engage in risky behaviors, because that's exciting, that gives us that dopamine hit. Also, when we're bored, we pay less attention because we can't focus as well. So that's a risk factor as well. We don't want somebody who's monitoring important equipment to be bored and to take their eye off the ball, because that can be dangerous. This is a real problem with industries like airline industry, where you've got really talented, clever pilots who spend a lot of their time on autopilot and just having to monitor things, which might not give them enough stimulation. So these things can lead to risk. So we see risk as a negative thing, and we need to counter that by making sure that people are less bored in the workplace. And I go into workplaces and I talk about things like job rotation and multi-skilling. And you see this a lot in industries. For example, the theme parks, if you ever go to theme parks, the good theme parks will have people, the employees rotate. Nobody stays in their job for very long, in their role for very long, because if you're asking someone to monitor a screen or strap people in or do something where there's a risk, there's a safety element, they won't be able to concentrate. They'll get bored very quickly. So you need to rotate them. So job rotation is one way to reduce the risk of making mistakes and of people wanting to do risky things just for the entertainment value. But I think you raise an interesting point about risk and the fact that is risk always negative? And I think organizations also ought to see that risk can be positive too. And I think organizations that try and avoid risk and try and be too safe can also be boring organizations and boring to work for and not innovative. So we want to, it's like any emotion, boredom or stress, we want to try and harness the benefits whilst minimizing the downside. So we don't want to have too safe an environment either. So there has to be just the right level of risk to keep people engaged and interested. And I think part of that is allowing people to take some risks, controlled risks that aren't going to harm people, obviously, but risks in terms of what would happen if we tried this, we launched this new product. It might not work, but it might. And some of the products and the most exciting innovations came about by chance or by someone just taking a chance on something. So I think organizations need to balance that and not become too safe and boring, I guess.
Yes, thank you very much, Sandi. Actually, there was some confusion about how much time we had left, and in fact, I was right. We have now run out of time. So I'd like to invite Lily to wrap up today's event.
Oh, I just wanted to say thank you again, Dr. Mann, and I'd like to thank everyone for coming in person and everyone who is zoomed in right now. You've added so much to our conference on boredom. We've learned so much, and I think it really adds and ties into the other speakers that we've listened to this week and that we will listen to this week. So I know there's not any more questions, and we are out of time. So I thank you very much, Dr. Mann, for being here with us today, and thank you for coming.
My pleasure. It's been absolutely fascinating, and good luck with all the other speakers and the event. I think it's an amazing event that you're putting on there.
Well, thank you very much. You helped to make it amazing, Sandi.
Thank
you very much.
Thank you. Goodbye now.
Bye.
Bye-bye.